Welcome back to Searchlight Report, a podcast from South Dakota Searchlight that brings you up to date on policy and politics in the Mount Rushmore state. I'm your host, Megan O'Brien. The state's primary election was Tuesday, and for Republican voters, ballots were stacked, with congressional candidates, hopefuls for legislative seats, and 4 candidates for the Republican nomination for governor. The winner in the governor's race needed 35% of the vote, which none reached on Tuesday night. That means the top 2 candidates, current Governor Larry Roden and businessman Toby Doden, will campaign for 8 more weeks until a special election on July 28th. The winner will face Democrat Dan Ahlers in the November general election. Though Doden didn't get enough support to win outright, he ended the night in first place at 31%. Roden finished second with 25%. The other 2 candidates were U.S. Representative Dusty Johnson, who was third with 23%, and State Speaker of the House John Hanson with 21%. I spoke with longtime journalist Kevin Woster, who wrote a column about the race for South Dakota Searchlight. Woster grew up on a farm near Reliance and worked for decades in journalism, including stops at the Brookings Register, Sioux Falls Argus Leader, Rapid City Journal, Kello TV, and South Dakota Public Broadcasting, plus freelance assignments for outdoors and agricultural magazines. He lives in Rapid City. Just starting off, the results from the Secretary of State's office are pointing towards that runoff with current Governor Larry Roden and then businessman Toby Doden. What are you making of just seeing those results right now?
Well, I was a little surprised that Dusty Johnson didn't make the runoff. I kind of expected he would be in that, although as I look back on it, sometimes I think his the way that he kind of developed his standing as a politician and office holder, as a sort of a mainstream Republican, and made some of those votes early on that Donald Trump didn't like very well, that were votes of conscience. And I think any person in my situation will look on and say we're pretty solid votes. He then went, really, as the pressure came on him, he really went kind of hard MAGA for a while in the last few years. And I think that maybe the Trump people never really bought that. I don't know that he was ever really fully accepted by that really fervent MAGA folks that are likely to turn out at a primary in really good numbers. And I think maybe he lost some of the mainstream folks that don't have a great passion for Donald Trump, mainstream Republicans, kind of the old school folks. So maybe I shouldn't have been as surprised as I was, but I was surprised that he didn't make the runoff. I was a little surprised that Doden finished first, although again, maybe I shouldn't have been with a state that's 3 times voted for Donald Trump in the general election at 62 to 63%. Heavily favored in this state among Republicans, obviously, Trump is. And especially early in his campaign, Doden came out very much like kind of a Trump gone South Dakota as a candidate. He kind of backed off that a little bit as he got closer to the election.
Right.
And, he has some similarities with Trump in his size and his swagger and his sort of the way he wants to burn down the establishment and everything. So there was that. I think that probably maybe I should have seen the probability that he could, get the first place spot.
Were you surprised at all by Roden being...
Yeah, I've been surprised by Roden from the start. I've always liked Larry when I worked with him, and it's been some years when I covered him, I should say, and he was in the legislature. I was considered him a very solid legislator, and a straight shooting, honest guy, likable guy, not a polished politician by any means. And I was really thought he did an excellent job as, suddenly to be elevated to the governor's spot or lieutenant governor in the year plus that he had. Did some good things, brought some normalcy back to the office after a kind of a turbulent 6 years or whatever it is under Kristi Noem, and ran a solid campaign with not very much money, and cut some really good effective ads, I think, that showed his a genuine South Dakota presence as a rancher and welder, and a guy that really presents a position of a solid South Dakota man. So and I was a little impressed, speaking of the other candidates, with John Hanson, because he hardly had any money. And, for him to get 21%, I thought that was pretty good too.
Yeah. And so I wanted to kind of go back to you said that during his time in the legislature, Roden really wasn't much of a polished politician, but now it's kind of become this runoff has become a contest between someone who's a pretty well-established political figure in South Dakota and someone who hasn't been elected to office. I mean, what do you make of that kind of contrast there, I guess?
Yeah, see, I mean, Doden can certainly argue that Larry Roden has been part of the political establishment, the peer establishment, and he has been. He had a lot of years in peer in the legislature and leadership positions, and then of course as lieutenant governor. Um, he still doesn't have great polish. And I don't think he particularly wants great polish, and a lot of people, including me, kind of find that endearing. And he was just being himself in the advertisements, and I think that was really effective. The It'll be interesting to see how the campaign plays out. I'm sure Roden is going to raise a lot more money very quickly than he did in the lead up to the primary election, when he had some trouble raising money. And Doden, of course, has, by the sound of it, all the money he needs himself, so he can spend a lot on this runoff too. So we're going to see a lot more ads.
Okay. Going back to the start of campaigns to now, when Representative Dusty Johnson had announced that he was running, he was kind of that presumptive front runner, and then he ended up being kind of pushed out of that top two for the
Mhm.
runoff. I guess what's kind of changed since the start of campaigning till now for those candidates?
Well, I touched on this in something I wrote for you guys at Searchlight. I think he had bad ads. I just don't think he could ever find an advertisement, a TV advertisement that presented him in a very effective way. He just didn't show very well in those ads, which seemed awkward and kind of stilted. And he's a good public speaker when he gets out and about. And I think he was caught in a bad spot, kind of between Trump and not being with Trump, which I'd say, I think his natural inclination obviously is to not be a big Trumper. And in a primary election, the votes that he had taken that were seen as going against Trump showed up in some of the attack ads, and they were probably had an impact. And just a lot of things went wrong with, and usually you have to blame the candidate. You have to blame the candidate and how he manages the campaign and the people that work on his campaign. So I assume he's doing some soul searching now about what went wrong. And sometimes somebody that's perceived as the front runner early on, that's a long time to hold that. And you can get kind of tense because you've started to assume that you're probably going to finish first. And then when you feel it slipping away, as perhaps he was starting to see some polling numbers in their internal polls that indicated that. I don't know that, but you have to wonder about that. You can kind of tense up, and he was throwing a lot of ads out there, and I'm not sure they were doing much good.
And I want to kind of think about too what you'd mentioned about Speaker of the House, John Hanson. From my memory, he was kind of one of the more underfunded candidates, and yet Tuesday night he managed to pull off more than 20% of the vote. I guess what does that mean? What do you think of that?
Well, I think he did well in the debates, and he's a lawyer. He's articulate. He's an experienced legislator. He's Speaker of the House. He knows how to speak in public, and he knows how to debate issues, and that showed. And I think that helped him. And I think what advertising he could run, the ads I saw by him, the mailers I saw by him, seemed pretty effective. I think he has a strong base among kind of the evangelical community, the people that feel strongly about certain social, cultural issues. And I think he's developed that and is solid there. And I think he put together, without a whole lot of money, he put together a pretty effective coalition of voters that turned out for him, and had really a respectable showing.
And what do you think worked well for the top two candidates for Roden and Doden?
Well, I think with Doden, it's just keep crashing. Then I'm going to cut your taxes. I'm going to cut government. I'm going to figure out a way to grow the economy. The insiders and peer have been in control long enough. I'm an outsider. I'm a self-made man. I've made a lot of money. I've created a lot of jobs. I know how to go in and fix all these things because I've had to fix them in my businesses for years. And, even the night of the election, he was getting that message out when people were talking to him about what's next. And he was going, what's next? I'm going to start working right away on fixing this election system that's taken so long to get these votes counted. That'll be different under me. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, I don't know what you can do as governor about an election system that's handled by, the Secretary of State and the local officials, but okay. Uh, I'm sure to some people, and he doesn't never explain really clearly how he's going to phase out the personal or the property tax in the state and still keep essential services, and how you could do that, and maybe cut sales tax too, or something. But effective campaign messages usually aren't about explaining how you're going to do something, they're usually about promising to do something, and he was pretty good at that. And I think that showed obviously with his finishing with the top percentage.
And with his whole he was running on that platform for quite some time of phasing out property taxes, and obviously that was kind of the dominant conversation in the legislature this year. How do you think that that issue impacted this race for governor?
Well, it certainly scared some people, and it may have gotten some people out to vote for the other candidates because what was it, 34 or 35% voter turnout, which is pretty good in a primary. I wonder if it will be that high in the runoff. If I remember right, typically it's not. Not that we've had that many in major races, but um, I think there were a lot of skeptics, and a lot of people just said, "Listen, it's time that even if he can't do exactly what he says he's going to do, I'd like somebody to be chipping away at that system of government that." I've resented all my life, and I don't think it served me very well. And he's the guy that I think it's going to go attack that problem.
Thinking too about I know that we'd kind of touched on with Hanson's financing, and Johnson was probably one of the more, well-funded candidates in this race. How do you think that campaign finances played a role for each of those that were running?
Well, money is messaging, and messaging matters, especially it's effective. I think it was definitely more effective for Doden. He used his money pretty well. His campaign ads were pretty good. The ones with him in it. He was in situations with regular people that, portrayed themselves as regular South Dakotans doing regular South Dakota jobs and work and facing regular problems and housing issues and affordability and work. And then I thought, and his ads generally were quite good, I thought. And then I thought the wife with the ad with his wife, Liz, I believe, was very effective, where she just looked at the camera and spoke very effectively, I thought, about, I will tell you what's in Toby's heart. I've heard all these things about him, and here's what I want to tell you that I know to be true about him. And showed pictures of them when they were a young married couple and pictures of them and their kids. And I thought that was an excellent ad and very effective for him.
And his name recognition and polling seemed to grow kind of as we got closer to the primary election. Do you think it was advertising? Do you think it was just getting out and shaking hands? What do you think kind of changed those numbers for him?
Well, certainly advertising, putting the ads out there, the debates certainly would have done that. He's a hard person to forget once you see him, because he's big and he has a real presence and he speaks forcefully. And so I think those two, and then he had a bus. Uh, I think if I remember right.
Mhm.
So I got around with that. He got around, shook hands, and did the work, to try and increase that name recognition and seemed to get it done, at least with the Republicans willing to get out and vote in that primary.
And we also saw, I mean, all four of these candidates try to align themselves with Trump in one way or another. I guess, do you see that also playing a role in this race?
Yeah, and there was some question about with some of the things going on right now in the Iran war and with the inflation impacts and with the price of gas and the price of groceries and the other things that people, especially people of low and middle incomes, are challenged by. You wonder if Trump's popularity dipped at all in the state where he's really been popular, again with the majority, not with some people. And it didn't seem like people were at all afraid to align themselves with the president, and I wouldn't have expected them to be. In fact, when Larry Roden used a couple of attack ads on Dusty Johnson, it was about Dusty's votes that were contrary to what Trump wanted, and the ad ended with something like, "If he's not for Trump, he's not for us." And so I think Trump was an obvious factor and player in this, as you would expect. I was a little surprised that Doden used him so heavily early on, aligned himself so many ways. I had a lot of mailers from Doden early on with him and Trump on the same mailer, and I'm the guy that's going to stand with the president and things like that. And I think he probably felt like he'd established that, as none of these candidates is more Trumpy, if we can use that word, than I am.
And so then looking forward, Dusty Johnson has had a lot of experience in state government. I mean, he worked with former Governor Dennis Dugard. He served on the Public Utilities Commission, and he's on his fourth term in Congress. What do we kind of make of his legacy now?
I think it will be mixed. A lot of things became mixed when Trump got to be such a powerhouse, because you will look at some of the votes he cast. You look at the big, beautiful bill, and there were certainly some good things in there, especially by South Dakota Republican standards, but some bad things too, and some ugly things, as well as what some people might call beautiful things. And I think a lot of Dusty Johnson's work was not highly recognized. He, at his best, he was trying to be a decent politician, using reasonable rhetoric to try and get things done for a conservative state. And we always have to remember that when we disagree with some of the things that he was working on. Most of them probably were approved of by the majority of South Dakotans, which are majority of them are Republican, and compared to Democrats and independents, and some majority maybe. I haven't looked at the numbers, but certainly, the dominant party is Republican, and so I think that there will be some things he will wish maybe he'd handled differently. But you look back on his 8 years of Congress, I think it'll be overall respectable. Some things he could have done better. His time with the governor, I think, taught him a lot, and I think he was, as an outsider and somebody that worked with him as a reporter, not in any other way but that, pretty smart and effective in that way, and as a public utilities commissioner. So he had experience. Is his career over, I guess, is the question. That's a pretty stinging loss, and you have to look at it right now and think, man, I don't have nearly the support, which is the support you need in South Dakota among the Republican primary voters, as I thought I did. And could he end up working for an administration in a cabinet level position, or will he go back to private business? Would he someday end up in DC as a lobbyist? I tend to think he'd want to be in South Dakota, but who knows? And I wouldn't rule out entirely another run for elected office someday. He's still a young guy.
What do you expect when it comes to where Johnson's supporters might go because of how Doden's been speaking about his opponents?
Well, that's a good question. I can't imagine very many Johnsons are going to go to Doden. Um, Maybe it surprised me. Yeah, I could see the Hanson supporters kind of, some of them going to Doden over economic stuff and they want tax cuts. They want something really, they want a real shakeup. and those that agree with Hansen on certain cultural social issues, which Larry Roden is also strong on, has proven that. And maybe they want a little more stability in the system and more of a regular, traditional South Dakota conservative. You might see that split in the Hansen votes going. I, I would hesitate. I mean, I would be inclined to say that Roden, who I assume is going to be surprised how much money he can raise now compared to the difficulties he had raising it before. I would hate to. I want to say that I think he's a favorite going in that, a very slight favorite, but boy, sometimes I wonder if I know anything about politics anymore.
He did say when I spoke with him after at his watch party, he'd said that they're getting a lot more funding, a lot more financial support from folks kind of
Yeah,
as they've gone to the end of this and as they're going forward now with the runoff.
sure. Yeah,
Uh,
they go from 4 to 2, and people who feel strongly one way or the other, now they've got more people willing to open their checkbooks, provided they didn't. People still use checkbooks, right? Not just old guys like
they
me.
do.
All right.
I'm sure I'm sure people can at least imagine them in their head.
Yeah. Okay. All right. And so that'll be interesting to see how the fundraising comes in and what approach they take. What approach are they going to take? It would be also interesting to see if there's any. I guess I don't see Dusty being a possible lieutenant governor. Roden's already got one, and I certainly don't see Dusty being considered by Doden, or Dusty considering Doden. Would Hansen consider it? Would Doden consider Hansen? I don't know.
All interesting questions. Um, and then as we go forward, what kind of topics do you anticipate becoming the focus of this runoff?
Well, one of the things I wondered with the primary was why nobody was hitting Doden. It seemed like he just kind of skated through, hitting everybody else, and nobody hit back to speak of. There was a little bit near the end, some text messages that I saw, and some social media stuff questioning some of the federal money he had taken for his businesses and how that was handled. But I mean, especially if it's as tight as it certainly could be, it's going to be hard because he's going to hit Roden. So it's going to be hard for me that somebody doesn't have something or won't find something stronger than we saw against Doden in the primary in this runoff, and that he's gonna get hit harder and more often.
To learn more about Doden and Roden, check out our interviews with them in prior episodes. Kevin Woster's commentary about the race is also available at SouthDakotaSearchlight.com. That's all we have for this episode of Searchlight Report. Audio for this episode of the podcast came from recordings by South Dakota Searchlight. The podcast is based on reporting by South Dakota Searchlight's staff. Editor Seth Tupper, senior reporter John Holt, and reporters Joshua Heyer, Mackenzie Huber, and me. I write the scripts and produce the audio with editing by Seth Tupper. South Dakota Searchlight is part of States Newsroom, the nation's largest nonprofit news organization. Until next time, I'm South Dakota Searchlight's Megan O'Brien with the Searchlight Report.